The year is 2157, and in what was once St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, children play laser tag among the marble columns. The cross has been replaced with a holographic art installation, and the only prayers being whispered are requests to the AI that manages the building's climate control. Sound far-fetched? Perhaps, but walk through the Swedish countryside today, and you'll find medieval churches converted into climbing gyms, nightclubs, and even private homes. The pews where generations once prayed now gather dust in antique shops, and the bells that called communities to worship ring only for tourists with cameras. For 17 centuries, Christianity shaped the architecture of Western civilization, literally and figuratively. It determined when you worked and when you rested, whom you could marry and how many children you should have, what books you could read and what ideas you could speak aloud. It funded the universities, inspired the cathedrals, and provided the moral vocabulary that even its critics used to challenge it. The American Civil Rights Movement quoted scripture. The abolitionists were predominantly Christian. Even the French revolutionaries, in their fury against the church, couldn't help but create secular rituals that mimicked religious ceremony. But something extraordinary has happened in the last 70 years, something unprecedented in human history. For the first time since Constantine converted in 312 AD, vast populations in historically Christian lands are growing up without any meaningful connection to the faith. Not just individuals here and there, entire nations. In the Czech Republic, 91% of young adults never attend religious services. In Estonia, 75% of the population identifies as non-religious. In the United Kingdom, more people practice witchcraft than attend Anglican services. The churches of Europe stand empty, magnificent monuments to a devotion that has evaporated like morning mist. This isn't just about declining belief. Plenty of societies have experienced religious skepticism before. The Roman elite were largely cynical about their gods by the late Republic. Enlightenment France had its share of atheists. What makes our moment different is the wholesale abandonment of Christian practice, Christian community, and Christian moral frameworks by populations that, just 2 generations ago, were overwhelmingly Christian. We're not witnessing a reformation or a revival. We're witnessing an ending. So what comes next? What does a genuinely post-Christian world actually look like? Not the caricature of hedonistic chaos that conservative Christians fear, nor the secular paradise of reason that new atheists once promised, but the messy, complicated, utterly unprecedented reality that's actually emerging. To answer that, we need to look at what's already happening in the societies furthest along this path, and the answers might surprise you. Let's start with the most obvious question. Does morality collapse? The Christian response to rising secularism has often been apocalyptic. Without God, they argue, everything is permitted. If there's no divine judgment, why not steal, lie, cheat, or murder? It's a question that troubles even some non-believers. Dostoevsky's Ivan Karamazov famously declared that without God and immortality, everything is permitted. But here's the fascinating thing. The most secular societies on earth are also among the most peaceful, prosperous, and by most measures, ethical. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, countries where church attendance hovers around 2 up to 3% and where half the population doesn't believe in God, consistently rank as the happiest, most trusting, and least corrupt nations on the planet. Murder rates in Scandinavia are among the lowest in the world, roughly 1/5 of the rate in the far more religious United States. Charitable giving remains high, social cohesion is strong, and surveys show that people in these countries are more likely to return lost wallets than in more religious nations. In fact, there's a curious inverse correlation. The more secular a wealthy democracy becomes, the lower its rates of violent crime, teen pregnancy, abortion, and social dysfunction tend to be. This isn't what the script was supposed to show. For centuries, the common assumption held that religion, specifically Christianity, was the essential glue holding civilization together. Remove it, and society would descend into Hobbesian chaos, a war of all against all. But the Scandinavian evidence suggests otherwise. Morality, it turns out, doesn't require supernatural enforcement. Humans are capable of cooperation, altruism, and ethical behavior without believing in heaven or hell. Evolution, as it happens, has given us powerful moral instincts, empathy, reciprocity, fairness, that predate any religion. Yet, before we declare victory for secularism, we need to look more carefully. Because while post-Christian societies haven't collapsed into immorality, they've developed some unexpected problems of their own. And these problems hint at what Christianity provided that many people didn't recognize until it was gone. Before we go further, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? And what's the time right now? Drop it in the comments. I'm Professor Archive, and this is where we dig into the histories, patterns, and futures most channels won't touch. If you're getting value from deep dives like this, consider leaving a super thanks. It genuinely helps us keep researching these topics that take weeks to properly investigate. The first thing that disappears in a post-Christian society isn't morality, it's meaning. And this is harder to measure than crime rates or charity, but it's perhaps more important. Christianity, for all its faults, provided an overarching narrative that explained where you came from, why you're here, and where you're going. You weren't just a random collection of atoms that happened to gain consciousness. You were made in the image of God, placed here with purpose and destined for eternity. Your suffering wasn't meaningless, it was redemptive. Your life wasn't insignificant, you mattered to the creator of the universe. Remove that framework, and what replaces it? In Scandinavian countries, rates of antidepressant use are among the highest in the world. Denmark, despite being the happiest country on earth, has antidepressant prescription rates double those of the United States. Now, correlation isn't causation, and there are multiple factors at play, including better mental health infrastructure and less stigma around seeking help. But there's something worth considering here. What if a society can be simultaneously comfortable and despairing? Materially secure but spiritually adrift? The existentialist philosophers saw this coming a century ago. Nietzsche's madman didn't celebrate the death of God. He warned about it, asking, "How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us?" Nietzsche understood that Christianity had provided the moral and existential foundations for Western civilization, and removing it would create a void that wouldn't easily be filled. And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. When traditional religion recedes, people don't become purely rational actors weighing evidence and making logical decisions. They remain deeply religious animals, but their religiosity flows into new channels. And this is where things get really interesting. Walk through any major Western city today, and you'll encounter the new faiths. They don't call themselves religions, of course. They're lifestyles or movements or communities. But they exhibit all the characteristics of religious behavior: sacred texts and prophets, original sins and redemption narratives, heretics and inquisitions, rituals of purity and practices of devotion. Consider wellness culture. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry built on something that looks remarkably like religious practice. There are the dietary laws, veganism, paleo, keto, each with the fervor of kosher or halal. There are the purification rituals, juice cleanses, detoxes, infrared saunas. There are the sacred spaces, yoga studios that feel like churches, with their incense and their hushed tones and their promises of transcendence. There are the gurus and the influencers, the saved and the unsaved, those who are awakened to the toxins in their environment, and those who remain in ignorance, eating processed foods and inviting disease. Or consider political ideology. In post-Christian societies, politics has increasingly taken on religious dimensions. It's not just about policy preferences anymore, it's about identity, belonging, and moral certainty. Both the far left and far right have developed what look like secular religions, complete with original sins. For the left, it's often systemic racism or environmental destruction. For the right, it's often cultural decline or national betrayal. They have their chosen people and their villains, their apocalyptic visions and their promised lands, their excommunications and their struggle sessions. The interesting thing is that these new quasi-religions are often less tolerant than the Christianity they replaced. Medieval Christianity, for all its faults, had a sophisticated theological tradition that included concepts like grace, forgiveness, and redemption. You could sin and be forgiven. You could be wrong and be corrected without being destroyed. The new ideologies often lack these safety valves. Cancel culture, whether practiced by left or right, operates more like Old Testament justice than Christian mercy. There's no confession, no penance, no pathway back to the community. You're in or you're out, saved or damned, righteous or irredeemable. This isn't to romanticize historical Christianity, which had its own brutal periods of intolerance. The Inquisition wasn't known for its mercy, and countless people were tortured and killed for heresy. But mature Christian theology developed concepts: love your enemy, turn the other cheek, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, that at least theoretically created space for human imperfection. The new secular religions are still in their infancy, and they haven't yet developed those moderating doctrines. Then there's the community problem. Churches, synagogues, and mosques did something that secular society has struggled to replicate. They created stable, intergenerational communities that brought people together regularly for something beyond consumption or entertainment. Every week, rich and poor, young and old, sat in the same pews, sang the same songs, and participated in the same rituals. These weren't chosen communities of the like-minded. They were geographic communities that included people you'd never otherwise meet. In post-Christian societies, what replaces this? Social media, which creates communities of the ideologically identical while amplifying outrage and division. Consumer culture, which offers shopping as leisure and brands as identity. Professional networks, which connect you with people just like you in socioeconomic status and educational background. None of these create the kind of deep, diverse, stable communities that religious institutions once provided. The data on loneliness is striking. In the UK, 9 million people report feeling lonely frequently or always. In Japan, so many people die alone that there's an industry specializing in cleaning up after these lonely deaths. Young people, despite being more connected digitally than any generation in history, report higher rates of loneliness than the elderly. We're more connected and more isolated than ever before. Churches provided something else too: rites of passage. Birth, coming of age, marriage, death. These transitions were marked with ceremony and community. You didn't navigate them alone, you were carried through them by ritual and surrounded by people who had experienced them before. In secular societies, these moments become privatized and often anxiety-inducing. How should you get married? There's no script anymore, so you have to invent one, which sounds liberating until you realize how exhausting it is to construct meaning from scratch. How should you mourn? Religion provided structured grieving: the sitting Shiva, the funeral mass, the specific prayers and rituals. Without it, many people find themselves adrift in their grief, unsure how to process loss without a framework. Here's a question that rarely gets asked: what happens to forgiveness in a post-Christian world? Christianity, whatever its historical failures to live up to its own teachings, put forgiveness at the center of its message. God forgives you, therefore you should forgive others. It's right there in the Lord's Prayer: forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. This created, in theory at least, a culture where redemption was always possible, where people could change and be accepted back into the community. Contemporary secular culture seems to be losing this capacity. We're developing what some sociologists call a culture of permanent record, where past mistakes are never forgotten or forgiven. Your old tweets, your youthful indiscretions, your worst moments captured on camera, all of it remains accessible forever, ready to be deployed against you. There's no statute of limitations, no path to redemption, no cultural mechanism for saying, you screwed up, you've learned, you're welcome back. This might seem like justice, but it creates a society of perfect performance, where everyone lives in fear of exposure and no one has room to grow. Christianity's concept of grace, unmerited favor, forgiveness you don't deserve, allowed for human imperfection. You could be both a sinner and saved, both flawed and loved. Take that away, and you get a culture of judgment without mercy, which might be more corrosive than the moral relativism that religious conservatives fear. Now, let's talk about children, because this is where the post-Christian experiment gets most interesting and most uncertain. In deeply secular societies, birth rates have collapsed. South Korea's fertility rate is 0.72 children per woman, the lowest ever recorded for a nation. Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Spain, Italy, Poland, all below 1.3, far below the replacement rate of 2.1. This isn't just about economics, though childcare costs and housing prices play a role. It's also about meaning and purpose. Christianity told people that children were blessings, that raising them was sacred work, that the temporary sacrifices of parenthood had eternal significance. Remove that framework, and having children becomes a lifestyle choice, one option among many, to be evaluated based on career goals, personal fulfillment, and cost-benefit analysis. And for many people, especially women who finally have access to education and career opportunities, the analysis increasingly comes out negative. Why sacrifice your freedom, your body, your career, your sleep, your savings for 18 years or more when you could travel, pursue your passions, and live for yourself? There's no objective answer to that question. Christianity provided a subjective answer, because it's your God-given purpose, because children are made in the image of God, because raising them is holy work. Secularism offers personal freedom and self-actualization, which are real goods, but they apparently don't motivate reproduction at replacement levels. This creates a fascinating paradox. The most progressive, egalitarian, educated societies, the ones that have most fully realized Enlightenment values, are reproducing far below replacement rate, while more traditional religious societies continue to have children. Ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel have fertility rates of 6.5 children per woman. Conservative Mennonites in the United States average 5 to 7 children per family. The Amish double their population every generation. If current trends continue, and demography is destiny, the future belongs to the religious by default. Not because religion is true or good, but simply because religious people have children and secular people don't. Dawkins's genes may be in all our textbooks, but it's the Mennonites' genes that will populate the future. Some secular thinkers have noticed this problem and tried to address it. There are now conferences on pronatalism in Silicon Valley, where tech billionaires discuss how to encourage reproduction among the educated elite. But here's the thing, you can't engineer meaning. You can offer tax breaks and childcare subsidies, but you can't replace the deep, taken-for-granted sense that having children is simply what people do, what gives life purpose, what connects you to something larger than yourself. Christianity provided that. Secularism hasn't figured out an alternative. Then there's the arts. Walk through any major art museum, and you'll spend hours looking at Christian art. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, Caravaggio's dramatic biblical scenes, the intricate religious paintings of the Dutch masters. These weren't produced by people going through the motions of a dead religion. They were created by artists who genuinely believed they were depicting the most important events in cosmic history. That belief produced transcendent art. What does post-Christian art look like? Often it looks like a banana duct taped to a wall selling for $120,000, or a toilet presented as sculpture, or performance art that's deliberately transgressive and ephemeral. There are exceptions, of course, brilliant secular artists working today. But there's an argument to be made that secular culture hasn't yet found visual or artistic language as compelling as what Christianity inspired. When your worldview is that we're sophisticated apes on a rock, flying through space, destined for heat death in a meaningless universe, what do you paint? What sculpture do you make that could rival the Pietà? Music, too. Bach wrote Soli Deo Gloria on his manuscripts, for the glory of God alone. The Mass in B minor, the St. Matthew Passion, this is music written for the worship of the divine, and it achieves a beauty that most secular music doesn't approach. Can atheism produce a Bach? Maybe, but it hasn't yet. Most contemporary music is about romantic love, personal struggle, or political grievance. Much narrower themes than the cosmic drama of sin and redemption, creation and apocalypse that Christianity provided. Let's discuss death, because this might be where secularism faces its greatest challenge. Christianity made death meaningful. You weren't ending, you were beginning. Your earthly suffering was temporary, your heavenly reward was eternal. This belief allowed medieval peasants to endure brutal lives, martyrs to face torture singing hymns, and ordinary people to approach death with something other than pure terror. What does secularism offer? In Scandinavia, where religious belief has collapsed, euthanasia and assisted suicide have expanded. The Netherlands, Belgium, and increasingly Canada have some of the most permissive assisted dying laws in the world. In 2022, over 13,000 Canadians opted for medical assistance in dying, a 30% increase from the previous year. Some of these are terminally ill cancer patients in unbearable pain, but others are disabled people, mentally ill people, even poor people who cite poverty and lack of housing as reasons for wanting to die. There's a grim logic to this. If consciousness is all you have, and your conscious experience is suffering with no hope of improvement, why continue? Christianity could say, offer your suffering to God. It has meaning. Something better awaits. Secularism can only say, your suffering is pointless biological malfunction. We can end it. Both might be true, but one creates resilience and the other creates exits. This isn't to argue against assisted dying for the truly terminal and suffering, but it does suggest that secular culture lacks the conceptual resources to make sense of suffering and limitation. We're very good at improving conditions, very bad at accepting the conditions that can't be improved. Japan offers another glimpse of post-religious life, though from a Buddhist rather than Christian starting point. As traditional Buddhism has faded, Japan has developed what sociologists call hyper-individualism. People live alone, work alone, die alone. There are rent-a-family services where you can hire actors to play your relatives at social events. There are cuddle cafes where lonely people pay to lie next to someone, fully clothed, just to experience human touch. Virtual girlfriends on phones provide emotional support that human relationships once supplied. This is what late-stage secularism might look like. Materially comfortable, technologically advanced, socially atomized, spiritually empty. Not dystopian exactly. People aren't starving or being persecuted, but not quite human either. We're social animals being reconfigured for solitary life, like zoo animals in exhibits, fed and safe, but existing in a way that violates something deep in our nature. And yet, and this is crucial, none of this means Christianity will return or should return. Many of the reasons it declined were good reasons. Secular societies offer freedoms that Christian societies denied: freedom of conscience, gender equality, sexual autonomy, intellectual inquiry without ecclesiastical censorship. Gay people can live openly rather than in shame or hiding. Women can control their reproduction and pursue careers. Scientists can investigate the world without checking their findings against Scripture. These are real gains, hard-won through centuries of struggle against religious authority. The problem is that we're discovering that freedom from religious authority doesn't automatically create freedom for human flourishing. It creates a void that gets filled with something, and that something is often corporations, ideologies, technologies, or therapeutic culture, none of which seem to satisfy the human need for transcendence, meaning, and community the way religion once did. Some secular thinkers have recognized this and are trying to create atheism 2.0, or secular religion, attempts to capture the benefits of religion without the supernatural beliefs. Alain de Botton's Sunday Assembly offers secular church services with music, community, and inspirational talks. The Satanic Temple, despite its provocative name, is essentially an atheist organization using religious structure to advocate for secular values. There are humanist chaplains in hospitals and universities, providing the counseling and ritual functions of clergy without the theology. But here's the problem. These attempts feel hollow to many people. Their religion is LARP, going through motions that lack the weight of genuine belief. A secular wedding ceremony might be lovely, but does it carry the gravitas of vows spoken before God? A naming ceremony for a baby might be touching, but does it match the theological significance of baptism? Ritual requires belief to generate meaning. Without it, you're just performing gestures. The future most likely isn't pure secularism or Christian revival. It's something stranger and more fragmented. We're already seeing the emergence of what sociologists call spiritual but not religious culture, where people pick and choose beliefs and practices from different traditions like items from a buffet, a bit of Buddhism for mindfulness, some paganism for earth connection, therapy for emotional processing, psychedelics for mystical experience, plus a vague sense that there's something more without committing to any particular theology. This a la carte spirituality offers maximum personal freedom but minimum communal coherence. Everyone has their own unique belief system, which means no shared language, no common rituals, no collective meaning-making. It's spirituality as consumerism, where you construct your identity from purchased experiences and adopted practices. And the result is often incoherent. People who believe in reincarnation but also heaven, or who think the universe has consciousness but don't believe in God, or who practice yoga and read tarot cards while identifying as scientific rationalists. The other likely future is demographic. Religious communities, especially Orthodox ones that maintain high birth rates, will grow in relative terms even as overall religiosity declines. Israel offers a preview. Ultra-Orthodox Jews were 5% of the population in 1990, 13% in 2020, and projected to be 30% by 2050. They're already transforming Israeli politics and culture through sheer numbers. Similar dynamics are playing out with conservative religious communities in America and elsewhere. So we might end up with a deeply divided society. A majority that's secular or spiritual but not religious, living highly individualized lives with few children, and religious minorities that are tightly communal, family-focused, and growing. These groups will share physical space but inhabit completely different meaning worlds, with less and less ability to understand each other. There's a final possibility worth considering, that we're in an in-between moment, and something genuinely new is emerging that we can't yet see clearly. The end of Christianity in Europe isn't necessarily the end of religion per se. New religions do emerge. Mormonism went from one man's vision to a major world religion in less than 2 centuries. Scientology built a global movement in decades. The cargo cults of Melanesia showed how new religions can spontaneously arise when traditional beliefs encounter modernity. What might a genuinely new religion look like? Possibly something that incorporates scientific understanding of the universe, the awe-inspiring scale and age of the cosmos, the mystery of consciousness, the interconnection of all life into a framework that provides meaning, community, and moral guidance. Something that offers transcendence without supernaturalism, or redefines the divine in naturalistic terms. Something that creates the social goods of religion, stable communities, rites of passage, meaning and purpose, without requiring belief in ancient texts or supernatural claims.